10. Chad Reed. In early November 2021, police in Lubbock, Texas received a call from a woman who said that her husband had been shot dead. Officers found the 54-year-old Chad Reed's lifeless body on the floor of a local residence. The home belonged to a man named Kyle Carruth, who was in a relationship with Reed's ex-wife at the time. The men had gotten into a heated argument outside the house over a contentious child custody battle between Reed and Carruth's partner. Cell phone footage of the disagreement shows the men verbally going at it before things took a shockingly deadly turn. As things continued to escalate, Carruth decided it was necessary to shoot Reed for his own protection. Reed died at the scene. Investigators determined that Carruth was acting within his rights by shooting the man, owing partially to the generous gun laws in Texas that allow property owners to fire at trespassers who threaten their safety. In the video, Reed can be heard threatening to take Carruth's rifle out of his hands, and at one point, it appears as though he actually tried to. A special grand jury decided not to charge Carruth in connection with Reed's death. His attorney, David Gwynn, said that his client regretted how things turned out and that Carruth extended his deepest sympathies toward Reed's family and loved ones. He said that the situation was painful for everyone involved, including Carruth, and that they all wished that things could have been worked out in a way that didn't cost anyone their life. But as Gwynn also pointed out, Reed chose to drive out to Carruth's remote property and confront and threaten him, and continued the altercation even after Carruth pointed a gun at him and told him to leave. And when you behave like that in Texas, you give the homeowner the right to use deadly force. 9. Nikita Tomar. Nikita Tomar was attending college in the northern Indian state of Haryana in 2020 when her life was abruptly taken from her at the hands of a stalker and his accomplice. The 20-year-old had just finished an exam when a fellow student named Tusif Ahmed and his friend, Rehan, tried forcing her into a car. She fought back and managed to escape, but Tusif ran after her and shot her in the head in broad daylight. The suspects then fled the scene, leaving Tomar in a pool of her own blood. She was taken to the hospital, but died from the gunshot wound. Nearby surveillance cameras captured footage of the attack and murder. Tomar's family said that Tusif had been stalking Nikita for 2 years with unwanted marriage proposals and other forms of harassment. He also allegedly tried forcing the young woman to convert to Islam against her wishes. Nikita's brother had filed a police complaint about the ongoing problems with Tusif several months before her murder. It was one of several reports that Nikita and her family members had made since the stalking began. But a so-called compromise was worked out with Tusif's family, who apologized for his behavior. He was told that he had to leave Nikita alone, but he apparently just couldn't stop himself from continuing to terrorize her. Detectives traced the suspect's cell phones and charged them with murder. They were found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. The murder sparked angry protests among university students at Nikita's school, and some officials and politicians spoke out against the poor quality of the region's law and order. 8. Andre Davis. 2 young men were stopped next to each other in their vehicles at an intersection in Federal Way, Washington last year, when one of the drivers pulled out a gun and shot the other to death. The seemingly unprovoked attack was captured on video by a traffic camera. Footage showed a Chevy Impala pulling up to a Mercedes-Benz right before the man behind the wheel of the Impala reached over his female passenger with a gun in his hand and shot the driver in the neighboring car. The victim, 19-year-old Andre Davis, drove a short distance before losing control of the vehicle, crashing it into some trees and a utility box and then rolling the car. He died at the scene. An autopsy found that Davis had been shot in the head, chest, shoulder, and leg, according to an arrest report cited by the Seattle Times. Just days later, detectives found a Chevy Impala matching the description of the shooter's vehicle parked in a stall outside an apartment complex. It was registered to 22-year-old Patrick Tables Jr. Inside, investigators found 2 spent gun cartridge cases. Because Tables had not reported the vehicle stolen and didn't appear to be searching for it, authorities suspected that he was behind the deadly shooting. They also determined, based on cell phone records, that Tables was near the crime scene on the night of Davis's murder. And just 20 minutes after the killing, the suspect was allegedly looking for news articles about it online. Tables was recently charged with second-degree murder and is being held on a $4 million bond. 7. Stephen Black. 34-year-old Stephen Black was inside a convenience store in Fort Lauderdale, Florida earlier this year when a man entered, put a gun to his head, and shot him execution style. The cold-blooded killer then fled the scene and is still at large. The disturbing murder was captured on surveillance footage, leaving Black's mother, Colette, devastated and wondering why someone would target her only son in such a brutal act of violence. Speaking to NBC Miami, she described Stephen as a gentle giant who would do anything for anybody and who would look out for anybody. The slain man's family immediately began a campaign to seek justice for Stephen. They've hung flyers throughout the neighborhood appealing to the public for help identifying the suspect. But they told reporters that someone keeps taking the notices down. Colette said that she didn't know who was doing it, but she firmly believes that someone out there knows who's responsible for Stephen's death. Police are also investigating and hope to catch the killer. And there's a monetary reward being offered for information leading to the suspect's arrest. 6. Holiday homicide. The 4th of July holiday took an unexpected tragic turn in 2016 when a group of men were ruthlessly shot to death outside a convenience store in St. Louis, Missouri. Surveillance footage revealed that the 4 victims pulled up in an SUV and that the 2 of them went inside the store while the other 2 waited in the vehicle. Suddenly, a red Dodge Charger pulled up. 2 men exited the car armed with rifles and began spraying bullets at the group. One of the shooters pursued the men who had gone into the store, while the other gunman shot at the individuals who had remained in the SUV. 31-year-old Samuel Jackson and 21-year-old Jamie Connor tried to exit the vehicle in a desperate attempt to escape their attackers, but they were shot dead at the scene. Another man was critically injured in the ordeal. Police counted over 60 shell casings, and the convenience store's windows were left riddled with bullet holes. A woman who was in the area at the time said that at first she thought she was hearing fireworks. Portions of the gruesome violence were captured on video, along with reasonably clear images of the 2 suspected gunmen. But police didn't arrest anyone in connection with the double homicide until 2 years later, when 29-year-old Devian Chester was charged with 2 counts of murder as well as assault and armed criminal action. In a bizarre and unexplained twist, the charges against Chester were dismissed earlier this year. Authorities never explained why the case was dropped. They said that the matter remains under investigation and that they're unsure whether the charges will be refiled. 5. Xavier Antonio Johnson. Earlier this year, 29-year-old Xavier Antonio Johnson rented a home through Airbnb in the small Central Florida town of Davenport and started using it as a headquarters for selling marijuana. The dwelling was located on a picturesque tree-lined cul-de-sac in a quiet area. The area is generally considered safe, and yet this is where Johnson met his untimely demise. On the evening of April 13th, 3 unidentified men entered the Airbnb with a handgun and shot Johnson to death. A surveillance camera captured footage of the trio entering and leaving the property, taking their victim's lifeless body with them. 2 of the men were carrying Johnson by the arms, and 1 was grabbing him by the legs. It's unclear where Johnson's remains ended up. Currently, investigators are not sharing any more about the case other than the handful of details that have been reported in the news. In the initial aftermath of Johnson's murder, all 3 suspects were still at large, and law enforcement was appealing for anyone with helpful information to come forward. Several days into the investigation, police charged 29-year-old Volusia County resident Justin Jenkins with first-degree murder and numerous other crimes in connection to the case. The crimes included armed robbery, shooting into an occupied dwelling, aggravated battery, aggravated assault, attempted murder, and being a felon in possession of a firearm. but they were still trying to identify the other two individuals featured in the surveillance footage and continued to encourage anyone with information to report what they know. 4. RUSSEL RICOU. Just days into the new year, an argument broke out between two men in the French Quarter of New Orleans. It was around 10:30 at night when 41-year-old Russell RICOU Jr. and 38-year-old James Patton got into a disagreement outside of a bar. Footage of the tense encounter was captured by a nearby surveillance camera and shows the two getting in each other's faces. Things became even more heated when RICOU took a swing at Patton, perhaps unaware that his adversary allegedly had a gun in his possession. RICOU failed to deliver the punch because he got shot, bringing the confrontation to a deadly end. A female witness, who can be seen in the video watching the interaction from down the block, fled on foot. Patton casually walked away from the scene where RICOU died from his injuries. Nearly a month after the tragic slaying, police caught up with Patton and took him into custody without incident. He was recently indicted on a second-degree murder charge, but as RICOU's family pointed out in a statement following the arrest, this is just the first step to achieving justice. Law enforcement is still encouraging members of the public to report anything they know about the crime. 3. CHESLEY Patterson. CHESLEY Patterson managed an Italian restaurant in Baltimore's Little Italy neighborhood and was incredibly well-liked by his coworkers, friends, and almost everyone that knew him. A community was left reeling earlier this year when he was shot dead in the street after leaving work. Police found Patterson with gunshot wounds in the middle of the night. He was rushed to the hospital, but it was unfortunately too late to save him. Surveillance footage showed the victim exiting his car, going into a nearby corner store, and then returning to the vehicle and putting something that he had bought in his trunk. Patterson got behind the wheel and tried pulling out into the street when a minivan rushed up beside him. A man jumped out of the vehicle with what appeared to be a gun in his hand and forced Chesley's car door open. He shot Chesley, then got back into the van and sped off. In the immediate aftermath of the senseless tragedy, investigators struggled to identify a suspect or a motive, despite the crime having been captured on video. A months-long investigation finally led them to 22-year-old Samuel Wise, who prosecutors claimed was on an armed robbery spree when he allegedly murdered Patterson. They believe that Wise was trying to rob Patterson and decided to shoot him instead when he tried to defend himself. Detectives connected the suspect's minivan with at least 2 other robberies that happened around the time of the murder. Wise faces a slew of charges, including first-degree murder, armed robbery, and assault, just to name a few. He tried to escape custody during the booking and interview process, but was quickly apprehended and remains behind bars while waiting to face justice in court. 2. Sean SEMPRIE. Police in Rochester, New York were exasperated last year as they dealt with a seemingly endless string of murders and other crimes raging throughout the city. They were at their wits' end with the disturbing rise in violence when they were called to yet another homicide scene outside a local pub. In the parking lot, officers found the lifeless body of 29-year-old Sean SEMPRIE, who had been shot multiple times. Surveillance footage from a nearby business shows someone firing a bullet into SEMPRIE, causing him to collapse onto the pavement. Shortly after the news broke of the homicide, Captain Frank Umbrino told the press that while it was too early to speculate, he was inclined to believe that the perpetrator was not a stranger. Umbrino said that he believed the crime was most likely domestic-related. Nobody has been charged in SEMPRIE's murder, and it's unclear where the investigation stands or whether there are any suspects in the case. This was just one of at least 3 homicides that happened in Rochester throughout a 24-hour period, highlighting just how dramatically things seem to be changing for the worse in the small upstate city. 1. VIKRAM JOSHI. In July of 2020, Indian journalist VIKRAM JOSHI filed a police complaint accusing several men of harassing his niece in the Ghaziabad district of Uttar Pradesh. He was also at odds with the group because he had recently told them that he disapproved of their criminal lifestyle, which included illegal gambling. Just days later, VIKRAM was heading home on his scooter with his 5- and 11-year-old daughters when he was brutally assaulted by several of the men he had reported to the police. One of the attackers shot Vikram in the head at close range, and then the group fled the scene. He died several days later from his injuries. A nearby CCTV surveillance camera captured the horrifying murder on video, sparking widespread outrage throughout India. Activists criticized the Uttar Pradesh government for its handling of the matter and for its poor law and order. They demanded a deeper investigation into the murder, which appears to be a revenge killing for the police report he filed against the men harassing his niece. Police Superintendent Kalanidhi Naitani told the press that 9 suspects had been arrested for their alleged roles in Vikram's death, and that a police officer had been suspended for failing to take his complaint seriously. But several suspects remained at large, and it's unclear whether the case has made any progress as it works its way through India's notoriously slow court system. Thanks for watching. Would you rather discover home security footage of a powerful gang committing a brutal assault near your home, knowing that reporting it to the police could put a target on your back, or find out that a creepy stranger had been secretly living in your garage or basement or attic for several months? Let us know which would be worse in the comments below.